rise up against us. We will not fear the war. God is our fortress. He will deliver us. The battle is the Lord's. He has commanded us, be strong and courageous. Our hope will rest in Him. And when we're finally facing the enemy, we will be singing, we will be singing. Worthy is He who was slain, to Him all glory and praise. Great is the name of our God. He was and is and will be, and He alone is holy. Great is the name of our God. Great is the name of our God. Christ resurrected, death is defeated. Our God has overcome. And as the King of Kings stands in His victory, we will be singing, we will be singing. Worthy is He who was slain, to Him all glory and praise. Great is the name of our God. He was and is and will be, and He alone is holy. Great is the name of our God. Great is the name of our God. Our hope is built on nothing less than Jesus' blood and righteousness. We dare not trust the sweetest frame, but wholly lean on Jesus' name. How great is the name that bids our sorrows cease, name that reigns in victory. On Christ the solid rock we stand. All other ground is sinking sand. Worthy is He who was slain, to Him all glory and praise. Great is the name of our God. Great is the name of our God. He was and is and will be, and He alone is holy. Great is the name of our God. How great is the name? Worthy is He who was slain, to Him all glory and praise. Great is the name of our God. How great is the name? He was and is and will be, and He alone is holy. Great is the name of our God. 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 Great is the name of our God.
Well, good evening, everybody. Good evening. Good evening. I want to welcome you to Hope Presbyterian Church. We're glad that you are joining us this evening. My name is Mike Geiler, and I have the honor of serving as the pastor here at Hope. and we're just so glad that you're joining us tonight. So as you know, tonight is the opening night of a speaker series that we are hosting at Hope around mental health and mental illness. And we're calling this series Anthem of Hope. And it really is an opportunity for us to open up a conversation about mental health and mental illness in our community. And so in addition to tonight, we will also host 2 more of these community sessions as part of the series. And you can see those on the screen. Next Tuesday, July 25th, will be our next session. And the final session is the following Wednesday, August 2nd. And all of those events will be at 6:30 here in our sanctuary at Hope. So just to kind of preview next Tuesday, we've got Dr. Juve Che from the Community Alliance organization will be speaking on some types of serious mental illness, how to access care. And then the following week, the final week on Wednesday, the 2nd of August, we'll have some licensed therapists from Compassionate Minds Therapy to talk with us about maintaining good mental health. And so each of these nights will feature different speakers with their areas of expertise and sharing their knowledge and answering questions. That's going to be part of what we'll do tonight and the other sessions as well. We have flyers, information in the lobby if you want to take some of those on your way out and share those with others. We put these events together for you, people in our community, and so our hope is that this reaches as many people as possible. And so we are glad that you have chosen to join us tonight. We know there may be lots of reasons that you are here. Maybe you want to learn more. We're all hearing a lot about mental health and mental illness in the media, in the news, on social media, TV. And maybe you are struggling. Maybe you have a child who is struggling. Maybe you have a friend or a coworker who is struggling. And we want to be part of bringing some help. And we want you to know that you are not alone. And we also want you to know that we care. And so we want to give you some specific information and some resources on mental health, mental illness that are available right here in our Omaha community. So a couple of things to kind of give you some logistics before we get going with our speakers tonight. Restrooms are outside both sets of doors in the sanctuary. If you exit to the back of the room, there's a hallway, and a set of restrooms is in that hallway. And obviously, when you came in tonight, there's a number of tables in our lobby with information, different organizations. That information is gathered here for you. It's for you to take as much as you want, and if there's people that you want to share that with, please do that. Please actually leave the table here, but take the information with you. Okay, great. Glad that we got that squared away. And also we've got refreshments. So later on as we exit, you're welcome to take some refreshments on your way out as well. And we want you to hang out. We want you to hang out and talk with folks that are here and get the information that you want and ask the questions that you want. Also, you can visit our website, which is hpcomaha.org. If you scan that QR code on the screen, that'll take you to a web page on our website that we've created that hosts all of the information for this Anthem of Hope series. It has speaker bios, information. It has links to websites and resources in our area that you can access. So if you'd like to visit our website, you can visit that QR code. It'll take you right there, and you can get some information there too. So in addition to the speaker series that we have for these 3 evenings coming up, we're also kind of mirroring that here on Sunday mornings. We're doing a sermon series here at Hope, also addressing mental health and mental illness. And so we worship at 10 a.m. on Sundays, and you're welcome to come join us for that over the next 3 weeks, as we'll also be covering some different aspects as well on Sunday mornings. So why are we doing this? Why are we hosting this tonight in this series? So our mission at church here at Hope is to love God, love all people, and live in grace. And we believe that living that out is important, and we want to be part of addressing often difficult topics like mental health and mental illness. And so that's what we want to do in these next 3 weeks and open this conversation for our community. So we're going to talk about tonight. Tonight we have 2 wonderful speakers that are joining us that will share each, and then we'll end the time tonight with a question and answer. We will be live streaming the speakers tonight. We won't live stream the question and answer portion, but the recordings of these sessions will be available on our website and on our YouTube channel of the speakers, and their presentations will all be available afterwards as well. As you came in, you received a note card that has some space on it for you to write down some questions that you might have. So as you listen to the speakers tonight, if there's questions that come to mind that you want to ask specifically, write those down on the card, and then we'll take a moment to collect those after both speakers have shared, and then we'll enter into a Q&A portion, and we'll feed the speakers some of those questions, and they'll do their best. They'll do their best. And then also, we ask you on the other side of that card that for questions, there's a little survey. You can flip that over, fill out a couple of questions that we're asking for some information, just some feedback on this event. We ask you to fill that out too, so you can do that as well. We're happy to get this conversation going and start this off tonight with some wonderful speakers. So our first speaker tonight is Sadie Hinkle. Sadie is the program director at the Kim Foundation. It's an Omaha-based nonprofit that serves as a supportive resource and compassionate voice for lives touched by mental illness and suicide. Sadie earned a bachelor's degree in English education from Morningside University and her master's degree in writing from Coastal Carolina University. Before working with the Kim Foundation, Sadie worked as a high school English teacher, where she realized her passion for advocating for mental health education and awareness. She currently manages events for the Kim Foundation, oversees programming and outreach efforts, and educates the community members on topics involving mental health awareness and suicide prevention. So would you please give a warm welcome for Sadie Hinkle.
Thank you. All right, so first I do want to say that is me. I just have makeup on in that picture, and I'm not wearing as much today. But before I get started, if we all also could give a round of applause to every staff member here at Hope, to Pastor Mike, to Lori who put this together, because it's so important that in communal spaces and church spaces that these topics are talked about. And they can be scary to approach. So I just want to commend everyone here. If we could give them a round of applause. And without further ado, I'll just go ahead and get started so we can go ahead to my next slide. Perfect. Next one. Awesome. So today I am going to be talking to you by laying the foundation of what mental health even is. How do we just generally talk about mental health? I'll get into some statistics and data, especially related to suicide and suicide prevention. And then I'll end with some resources, and I will also say I have tons of resources outside too, but we'll go over a few while I'm up here. Next slide. But before I do that, I'll talk to you about who I am, who the Kim Foundation is, and what we do. So as Pastor Mike read in my bio, I approach this topic with someone who, has had a history of mental health conditions in my family, but who also was an educator. And as I furthered my career in teaching, it just became something I was very, very passionate about. Especially the more I saw our youth struggle, right? I saw that in my classroom every day. And so I became passionate about finding a job, in this field, but more so as someone who strives to connect people to resources rather than, being a clinician or a therapist. So that's exactly what we do at the Kim Foundation. So we were founded back in 2001 in honor of Larry Courtnage's daughter, Kim. So Kim died by suicide back in the 1980s, and everything we do is really in her memory. So there are really 4 things that we do. Number 1, like I said, we work to connect people to resources. We open up that initial conversation regarding mental health. We also provide grants to other local nonprofits. And the two things that I personally am most passionate about is we increase awareness surrounding mental health and suicide prevention, and we work to break down that stigma that's often associated with seeking mental health care. So as you can see here, this is the Courtnidge family. They are big Husker fans, if you couldn't tell from that picture. I'm an Iowa Hawkeye fan, so I always, we get along still. I still enjoy my job. But go ahead, next slide. So I like to hear, if you are a brave audience member today, I love to hear the perspective of who I'm speaking to. Because it can be different generationally, it can be different based on where we live. But in your opinion, why is it so hard for people to talk about suicide or mental health conditions? Why is that a tough conversation for people to have? Does anyone feel brave? Yeah, thank you for answering. Where are you at? I also, surprise, I have stress balls if you answer. So yeah, it definitely, okay, ready? I'm historically bad at throwing, but not, hey, nice. So yeah, you said it was it feels very personal, right? Yeah, it's scary to maybe want to ask someone such a personal question, and it might be even scarier to hear that personal response. So there's this vulnerability that inherently comes with talking about things that people can't see, right? Anybody else? Yeah, was that you? Yeah, do you mean, so she said helplessness. Do you mean helplessness of the person experiencing that mental health condition? Yes. So it's so hard to talk maybe about mental health if you have no idea what that person is going through and you think, I don't want to say the wrong thing. I'm scared to even approach this topic because what if I make it worse? And then there is this big feeling of helplessness because it's like, well, if I don't say anything, that's probably pretty bad. But if I do say something, I could make it worse, right? There's that general feeling of anxiety for sure. Thank you. Next slide. So before I get into uncovering more of that, I'll talk generally just about what mental health is. So mental health, at the baseline level definition, is how we think, how we feel, and how we act. So I would also like to stress that every single person in this room has mental health, the same way that we all have bodies and we all have physical health. We all have mental health too. Sometimes that phrase mental health becomes synonymous with mental illness or mental health disorder. But just like we all have physical health, we all have mental health. You know, if I or my kid is playing a basketball game and I fall and I break my arm, it's very, very normalized in our society to cry, probably would be the first thing I would do, and then to immediately ask for help, right? Like, ow, my arm hurts, I need help, I need to go to the doctor. You know, for some reason, mental health is not treated in that same way. It's much more stigmatized. But when we talk about what mental health is, it is simply just how we think, how we feel, and how we act. So that can, it sounds very simple. Obviously, those are things that we experience as individuals. It might be harder to recognize in other people, but that really just is the definition of mental health. And just like our physical health, our mental health can come in waves. It can be really great, and it can be not so great. So next slide. So when we talk about mental health and suicide and all of these things in general, which you'll do more and more of as your time progresses if you keep coming to these sessions, but it's important, to get the language. It's not a make or break to get the language right, but it can help by using the right words, because language is important because it makes people feel either included or excluded, right? So we just like to give you some words to use. As I said before, I was a prior English teacher, so I am biased. I think language is very important. I love words because I think they can be empowering. If I know what to say, if I know how to say it, then I feel much more confident in having that conversation with someone. So the first thing we always like to tell people when you're talking about mental health, especially with someone who maybe is experiencing a decline in their mental health, it's really important to use people first language. So this is very easy. It's literally just putting the person first in the sentence. So for example, let's say my mom has bipolar disorder. I would say it like that by putting my mom. Let's say my mom's name is Sandra. Sandra lives with bipolar disorder, right? Instead of saying my bipolar mother, because then her being bipolar becomes her entire identity. So just putting the person first in the sentence. Avoid using any slang words to describe mental illness. This is so ingrained in our everyday language. Can anyone shout out an example of a word that is used, a slang word that we don't use it to describe a mental illness, but we use it every day in our language? Crazy, yes. That is a very popular one that we say. This morning you might have said, the weather is crazy. It was sunny and raining, and now it's sunny again, right? Any other ones? Nuts. Insane. Insane is I think, a really popular one right now. That's insane. Sometimes used in a good way, sometimes in a bad way, depending on how old the person is you're speaking to. So those are just very minor examples, right? And there are so many more. Psycho, I think, is one that's used a lot of time, especially to maybe describe a young woman. And there are so many more. It takes a lot of work to retrain your brain, and then not only to retrain your brain, but to retrain your mouth from avoiding those words. But it really can help a lot, just when we think about those words that we use and try not to use them. Any kind of nonverbal communication can be very triggering. So, for example, if someone is acting really irrationally and I'm, baffled by that, what might I do for nonverbal communication? Yes, I might do this, right? Or if I'm really bored, what might happen that people often do is they pretend to put a gun up to their head. And those things can be very triggering because ultimately we don't know what the person next to us has gone through. Maybe they lost a loved one that way. Maybe they're struggling with suicidal thoughts, and we never know what anyone else is going through, so we ask you to avoid those. And then finally, something that we as a foundation are really passionate about is just completely changing the way that we talk about suicide. So as I'm sure you say this, your family members, your friends say this because it's very common language. We hear this in the media all the time as well. When someone dies by suicide, you will hear that language, committed suicide, right? We are asking people to take away that word committed because, to put it in perspective, we commit crimes, we commit sins. And so we ask people instead to use the phrase died by suicide. To put it in perspective, you would not say she committed a heart attack. She committed cancer. So just by changing the way we talk about it can decriminalize that act of suicide because, when people are in that moment, it ultimately is not really a choice. It's a side effect of the mental health condition that they're going through. So those are just some ways that we can help be more inclusive when we're talking about mental health. That's not to say someone's going to find you and point at you and say, you can't say the word crazy. That's not what we mean at all. Just be conscious of the words you're using and try to make a point to make people feel included as well. Okay, so here's another chance to win a stress ball if you are really sad you didn't get one of those stress balls before. These are facts about suicide. Does anyone want to take a guess as to what that first watch with the 11.5 on it symbolizes in relation to suicidal data? That is an amazing guess. You are actually wrong, but in a good way. Thank you for laughing at that. I love that first one. It's better than every 11 and a half seconds. It's actually every 11 and a half minutes, someone in the U.S. dies by suicide. Worldwide, that number, unfortunately, is closer to that. 11 and a half seconds is every 40 seconds, someone in the world dies by suicide. What about the second one with a 90%? Who said that? Good guess. Again, not related to bullying, but that 90%, I'll throw it from here. Sorry in advance. Good catch. That 90% represents the fact that 90% of people who die by suicide have some form of underlying mental health condition. That could be diagnosed. It could be something they've been seeking therapy for years. That's very common, but it could also be undiagnosed as well. I'm not even going to let you guess the third one. No one in my 2 years at the Kim Foundation has ever gotten it right. That represents the fact that suicide is the second leading cause of death for 10 to 14-year-olds. And I know you hear that number 10 and it's awful, right? And also the second leading cause of death, excuse me, for 24 to 35-year-olds. So, I will also like to say that all of these terrible statistics, there are things we can do about them. You have whole foundations, organizations, everyone you'll listen to these next few weeks are actively trying to combat these numbers. The next one is a not so fun one. Does anyone want to take a guess as to that one? So you have the one child circled out of the 5. Yeah. Yeah, you're really close. So 1 in 5, you're welcome. 1 in 5 children, or it's not even just children, it's 1 in 5 9th through 12th graders have self-reported that they seriously considered suicide in the past year. So I don't know if you know a teenager in your life, but they're not typically very forthcoming with everything they're going through, right? So with that being a self-reported statistic, we anticipate that number 1 in 5, which is already awful, to be higher because that is self-reported. And then finally, that last car crash icon represents that in our state of Nebraska, and this is from 2019, deaths by suicide were 4 times more common than deaths by car crashes with alcohol-related incidents. So you do have the drunk driving component, but suicides were 4 times more prevalent in our state. To put that in perspective, I always say when I drive down I-80 or when I watch TV that has commercials on it, I always see anti-drunk driving ads, which of course is valid and we support, but you don't as often see mental health ads or suicide prevention ads, right? And in our state, it's the 4 times more deaths. So go ahead, next slide. So those are all the awful things. I will also say we're going to get into what I believe to be the life-saving portion of this presentation. When we talk about some of these risk factors, when we talk about some of the warning signs, hopefully not, but it might be somehow related to you or someone you know. So know that there is hope, there is healing, and that's what I'm going to get to now. But if you ever need to step out for a second, take time for yourself, please do that. But I will get into suicide risk factors. So risk factors are a combination of factors that contribute to the risk of suicide. They are not direct causes of suicide at all. Someone may have experienced every single thing on this list, or most things on this list, and they may never have a suicidal thought at all. So these are just things to look out for. Again, not direct causes, but they are risk factors. Probably most of them you would expect, right? A death or other trauma in the family, a pre-existing mental health condition, any kind of physical illness, disability, and pain, especially if that's chronic pain, if that's pain that they have to live with. Social isolation. So when the pandemic started, we at the Kim Foundation believe, we met with a lot of people, we met with experts, and we decided, the week of the pandemic, that we were going to focus on middle-aged people who lived alone, because we believed that those individuals would be the most at risk during the pandemic in terms of suicide. We found out as the pandemic went on that our youth were actually most affected by that, as we now all know, because they, weren't in school. And so that's kind of proof that social isolation can really affect your mental health. Persistent, serious family conflict, you can read through the rest, but, any kind of abuse, any kind of bullying or harassment, especially in young people, but it's not always young people. Anybody can be bullied at any walk of life. And then another big one is prior suicide attempts. If someone has attempted suicide before, they are unfortunately more likely to attempt again. So with that in mind, here's what you can do. Here's what you can take away. Here is that life-saving information. We call it suicide prevention because suicide is preventable, right? We, as community members, as church members, as family members, as friends, can notice these signs in the people that we love, or maybe even strangers or coworkers, and we can work to prevent that suicide. So the main step in doing that is knowing what those warning signs are and what they look like. So all of these, they're probably pretty hard for you to read. I'll go through them. All of these come down to a pattern or change in behavior. So the guideline we give people is typically about 2 weeks. If you notice changes in a loved one or someone you know for about 2 weeks, that's when you should reach out. That's not to say if you're very, very concerned about someone and it's only been a couple days, you will do no harm by reaching out to them. But 2 weeks is about the guideline that we give. So the first on there is talking about killing themselves. That sounds like yeah, duh. But oftentimes when someone says that, we're so scared of that being what they really mean that sometimes we play it off as a joke. We pretend we didn't hear it, but that's a big warning sign there. Increasing the use of alcohol or drugs, any kind of uncontrollable anger or sadness, or an increase in mood swings. So oftentimes when people think mood swings, they think very negative emotion like anger or sadness. But we caution people because sometimes, people will be experiencing those negative mood swings, and for seemingly no apparent reason at all, their mood swings in the complete opposite direction. They're overly ecstatic, they're overly, energetic or happy. And sometimes that happens because when someone is struggling and they make the decision to end their life, they feel peace and happiness with their decision. So especially if they're exhibiting these other warning signs, that sometimes is not okay, I don't have to worry about them anymore. Still make sure you're checking in. Feeling worthless and without purpose, or just feeling hopeless, desperate, or trapped. Oftentimes this comes across in small statements like, I don't see the point anymore. Nobody cares about me. Nothing matters, those types of things. Losing interest of things they once enjoyed and withdrawing from loved ones or activities they once enjoyed. This is especially common in, say, high-achieving youth who are maybe athletes or involved in clubs and all of these things, and maybe care a lot about their grades, but then suddenly stop caring about their grades, stop going to practice, those types of things. Anxiety and depression, an increase in those, a change in sleep or eating habits, whether that's they can't get out of bed or whether that's they can't fall asleep. Neglecting personal hygiene or care, or self-injury or reckless behavior. So those two really come down to they do not care about the safety of their body. That would be a warning sign for sure. Communicating unusual thoughts. Ultimately, you hopefully know this person, right? So if they say something that is very unusual for them, especially coupled with these other warning signs, that would be a sign to check in. And then giving away prized possessions. So that's a very tangible one. Most of these just come down to noticing the behavior. But sometimes when someone, again, makes the decision to end their life, they want the items that they love most to be with the people they love most when they're gone. And so, we've heard stories of, again, I'll reference a younger person giving away like their PlayStation or something that is so extremely valuable to them. Are there any questions on these warning signs? And also we'll have a Q&A at the end too, and you probably don't want to ask a question and raise your hand in front of all these people, so we'll have, they've thought ahead with all of that stuff. So go ahead, go to the next slide. So there are, with those things in mind, those are things you can notice as the potential crisis is potentially brewing. But there are things that we can put in place for ourselves and for our loved ones that reduce a person's chances of ever having suicidal thoughts or actions at all. These are what we call protective factors. So being involved in hobbies or activities is a huge protective factor. You'll notice nearly all of these things come down to connection. Being connected to your community, having access to treatment is a big one. Can I get in to see a therapist? That's why it's great that you guys will have a whole session dedicated to access to care, because that's a huge protective factor. And not having access to means. So that means keeping your homes a safe space, whether that's making sure to lock up your firearms if there are firearms in the home, if that means having a lockbox for your prescription medications, especially if you have children around or anyone you may be concerned about. That is just a huge protective factor, because oftentimes that decision is made in a pretty narrow time frame. And if we can get rid of any means during that time frame, that can be a huge help. Having strong problem-solving skills sounds so simple, but it really, really can help, because what that comes down to is that person knowing, man, I'm having a tough time today. I cannot see the end. I can't see the light at the end of the tunnel. I cannot see a solution to this problem today, but I know there's hope, and one day I will. So that's just having strong problem-solving skills, having a positive self-image, having a spiritual life or faith. Again, that's a lot of hope comes from that, right? So that can be a huge protective factor, and also connection and community. So we always endorse that. Having close family relationships, and then having strong peer support systems. Again, all about connections. The more connected you are, the better. So let's say you notice these warning signs in someone, and you're like, okay, but what do I do? What do I say? There's an acronym that you can use to remember, which is called ACT. So that's what you want to do. You want to act on those warning signs that you see. The A in ACT stands for acknowledge. Next slide. So acknowledge simply means you go up to that person, you acknowledge the changes or warning signs that you've noticed. You want to really refrain from judgment. This is hard for me personally. You want to control your impulse to fix the problem. That's not really what they need. They just need someone to listen to them. You're not going to argue. You're not going to debate. You're not going to analyze. You just want to be there. It really comes down to you saying, hey, I care enough about you to notice these changes in your behavior. And so you can say something like, hey, lately I've noticed you've been really irritated. You haven't been coming to Wednesday night group. You seem really down. I'm worried about you. What's going on? And we ask you to keep that question open-ended, because this, again, is something I've been guilty of in the past. Let's say I'm really worried maybe about my brother, and I'm scared of his answer because I want him to be okay. So sometimes I'll phrase that question as, well, there's nothing going wrong. Is there anything wrong? There's nothing wrong, is there? If I say it like that, I say, is there anything going on? What are you going to say? No. So make sure you're open-ended. Say like, hey, I've noticed these things. I'm worried. I care about you. What's going on? And then the C stands for care. So once you're done talking, or once they're done talking, you'll want to validate their feelings, show them you care, and the next part will be to tell, which is connect them to resources. So, again, your likely, as much as we want to, not going to fix all of their problems, right? So you can just say, oh my gosh, you're going through a lot of things. I can't imagine how that must feel. That must be so difficult. Please know that I care about you. Maybe I love you. I can't fix it, but I'm here for you. Let's find someone who can help. So you'll want to avoid statements like, oh, I know how you feel. This happened to me with my son when he was going through this, and this is what we did. That is oftentimes what we try to do, but when we do that, that takes the conversation off of that person experiencing the problem and shines a light onto ourselves, and it can be invalidating sometimes. It could be worse, snap out of it. You need to get over it. Any sort of invalidating statement you'll want to avoid. So show them you care, and then the next step is to tell. So follow your gut. If you're concerned that they might be thinking about suicide, if they're a harm to themselves or to others, that's when you have to do this scary thing and ask them about it. So I will say in my life as an expert talking to you all today, I have had to ask that question, are you thinking of suicide? Are you thinking of killing yourself? Are you thinking of ending your life? 3 times in my life. Each time it felt wrong. It felt wrong to say because that stigma is so deep and it's so scary. But I will say each time I asked that question, I only ever felt relief afterwards. And some of them were emergency situations, but still we got that person help and I felt, again, relief. So don't be afraid to ask that question. There's a myth, I don't know when it started, but there's a myth out there that states that if you ask someone or say that word suicide, that you'll put the thought in their head. They've heard of the word suicide. I promise you, you are doing no harm by asking them that question. In fact, it might be life-saving. So that's the first step if you're worried. You say, are you thinking of suicide or are you thinking of ending your life? If they say yes, that's when you have to take it a step further. That's when you say, okay, have you thought about how you would take your life? Or another way to phrase that is, do you have a plan to end your life? If they say yes, that's when you say, do you have access to those means? If they say yes, that's an emergency situation. Do not leave them alone. Anyone who's suicidal should never be left alone. And then we would go from there with resources that I'll talk about in a second. So just assess the severity. It might not be that severe. It might be they think about it sometimes and still don't leave them alone. Get them connected to resources. And maybe you make a safety plan with them. Maybe that safety plan is, okay, you need to know I care about you. Talk with them. And then maybe that safety plan is every Tuesday, we're going to sit down. I want to hear about your week. I want you to check in with me on your mental health. I want to know how you're doing, right? A safety plan can be as simple as that. And I saw out there on, I think it was the Nebraska Family Helpline table, there's a really great resource for someone making a safety plan before a crisis, which is always most helpful. So make sure you pick up that resource. And then let's say, because I've only talked to you for about half an hour, let's say you forgot all of this, and hopefully you never need to use it, but let's say you forgot it all. It's very common. Again, I was a teacher, so I know the rate of these things being forgotten, probably pretty common. But 988 is always there for you. So there are also great 988 resources out on tables. Pick up a magnet, put it on your fridge, take a wallet card, put it in your wallet. If you forgot all of this stuff, you are with someone who's having a crisis, or you're just really concerned about them and you don't know what to do, get out your phone, stay with them, put it on speaker. If they don't want to call 988, you can call 988 for them, and they'll walk you through next steps. So 988, if you're unfamiliar, replaced that very long suicide prevention hotline number, which used to be 1-800-273-8255. I only know that because this is my job to know that. Most people do not know that number because it's too long. So now 988 works much more similarly to 911. So just like you call 911 in a physical health emergency, you can call 988 if you're worried about someone's mental health, if they're having a mental health crisis. But it doesn't just have to be a crisis. You can call and text it too. So 988, lots of resources out there on that. And then I think we can just go ahead and go to the last slide. Oh, no, perfect. Okay, so I will leave this up here as Maggie comes up to speak, or as Pastor Mike comes up to introduce Maggie to speak is probably what will happen. But here's my email. Here's our phone number. You know, again, we work to connect people to resources. We work to inform people about mental health. And we do a whole bunch of other things that I didn't have the opportunity to talk about today. So if it's anything in relation to mental health or suicide prevention, we can help you out. And if we can't help you out, we'll find someone who can help you out. So thank you again all for being here today. Even just engaging in this conversation is really important. So thank you so much.
Thank you, Sadie. That was wonderful. Well done. Thank you for that. Yes, if you'd like to take down, hopefully you got that information for Sadie. If you'd like to take that down now, you can, or you can scan that QR code. But wonderful to have Sadie with us. So next, I would like to introduce our next speaker. Maggie Ballard from Heartland Family Service is with us tonight as well. And Maggie has worked in substance abuse prevention at Heartland Family Service for over 9 years. Also, she is the legislative liaison for her agency. She graduated from UNO with a bachelor's degree in criminal justice and went to grad school in 2019. And she earned a certificate in public management and is a certified prevention specialist in the state of Iowa. Maggie is the president of Nebraskans for Peace. She serves on the Foster Care Review Board, the Racial Justice Committee of the Reentry Alliance of Nebraska, and she's passionate about preventing addiction. Having grown up as a pastor's kid, Maggie is excited to share information with the faith community and everyone who is here tonight. So help me in welcoming Maggie Ballard.
Thank you, and I'd like to echo some things that Sadie said about what a great opportunity it is to be here with all of you and to see so many people that are interested in this topic, because so much of the time, presentations that I give are by people who are maybe in school or maybe court recommended to be listening to me. So it's great to have people here when they don't have to be. So go to the next slide, please. I want to touch a little bit on mental health, and there are a lot of misconceptions in our society. Raise your hand if you've ever heard people talk about self-medicating. Okay, so we know that that happens, right? That definitely is a problem. I'm going to talk about something that is not very well known, which is how usually we see that when people are using substances, they're actually more likely to develop mental health problems afterwards rather than having that occur before. I wanted to spend a little bit of time giving some information about addiction, because you heard Pastor Mike say that I am passionate about preventing addiction. And it's something that a lot of people don't quite grasp because there is research out there, but it's not taught across the board. So just like with any lifestyle-related health problem, let's say we're talking about diabetes or heart disease. We know if I have that family history of heart disease, what does that do for my chances of developing heart disease? It increases it, right? So let's say on top of that, I choose to eat cheeseburgers every single day for lunch and dinner, okay? Is that going to increase or decrease my chances of developing heart disease? It's going to increase it even more. Okay, do I have to have that family history of heart disease in order for me to get it? No, that can happen on its own if I'm making those high-risk choices with heart disease. If I'm eating a lot of cheeseburgers, if I'm smoking, if I'm not exercising, all of those things are going to be what we consider to be high risk. And I really liked what Sadie talked about with language, because you'll hear me do my best to always use person-first language. I also try to talk about high risk and low risk, Because in general, in our society, we talk about good people make what choices? Good choices, right? Bad people make bad choices. The reality is that, especially when we're talking about substance use, we have some set definitions, and we know that there are lots of great people in the world who make very high-risk choices. So I want to talk a little bit about that. This formula that you see up here, if you go to the next slide, you see the same thing applies to addiction. And we've kind of known this for years and years and years. People know that addiction tends to run in families. And they thought maybe it was because of the environment that I was raised in. If I saw people using, if I thought that that was just kind of how people handle their stress, if it's something we do at holidays, all of that would contribute to me being more likely to use. And so maybe that would make me more likely to develop addiction. But actually, studies have shown that it's something in the biology. If I have a biological family member with addiction, such as a parent or a grandparent, I am 4 times more likely to develop addiction myself. Okay, so that's how we know that there is that biological component. Now, we could say I have a parent, a grandparent, a sibling, and 2 aunts and uncles that all have an addiction. If I choose to never even touch a sip of alcohol, can I become addicted to alcohol? If I choose to never use it, can I become addicted to something that I don't use? No. So again, that second portion, the choices, that's what's really, really important. And that can be very empowering for some people who might have that strong family history and they feel like this is kind of inevitable. This is the road that other people I know have gone down. I'm probably going to have the same thing happen to me. That's not true, okay? And I'm hoping I have a little time at the end to give a very simple demonstration for what people at younger ages can do, which is going to reduce the chances of developing addiction by literally 90%, okay? So we'll have to make time for it because that's a really big deal, 90% decrease, right? So when we're talking about the choices, whether I choose to drink or use marijuana or vape or whatever I'm choosing to do, a lot of times our society wants to emphasize why we're using. Don't use if you're feeling depressed, don't drink alcohol, okay? But if you're going out to celebrate and you're just drinking socially, that's okay, right? These are the things that we hear about in our society. Research actually shows that the quantity and frequency, so how much I choose to use and how often I choose to use, that's actually going to be more important than the reasons why I choose to use. All right, so I'll say that again. The quantity and frequency is going to be a lot more important than the reasons why, okay? But, of course, the reasons I choose to use, that's still going to contribute to the choices I make. What types of things affect the choices that I make? Next slide, please. There's a lot of things that influence it, right? My personality, the things that I care about, the settings I like to be in, my attitude. There's this other thing, too, that a lot of us don't even recognize or maybe don't want to admit, but that's advertising, okay? How many of us think that people tend to be influenced by advertising? Yeah, most people's hands will go up. How many of us believe that we ourselves are influenced by advertising? Yeah, not quite as many hands if we're... is what is very common, right? People would like to say, oh, I'm above that. But the truth is, if I showed you a picture of some golden arches, we would all know that we're talking about McDonald's. We all know what different things mean by the images that we see. So, unfortunately, we have a lot of powerful industries in our country that are also able to influence the choices that we make around alcohol, tobacco, and other drugs. And that's another thing. You'll never hear me say drugs and alcohol. It's alcohol and other drugs, right? Because alcohol is a drug. And we see that in our country, there are these very rich and powerful industries. Oh my gosh, I could spend a lot of time up here getting really riled up. And I even wrote on my notes here, don't cuss, you're in a church. Because I cannot stand the way these industries make their money, but that's how they do it, right? Any product you're trying to sell, whether it's bread or roses or iPhones, whatever it is, iPhone cases, you're going to have the same goal. You want people who are using your product to buy more, right? And people who don't use your product to start using. So that is the strategy that we see any one of these industries is going to try to tackle. And who is the best person that they can get to start using? A young person. Why does that matter? If I have a 16-year-old or a 60-year-old handing me a $20 bill for my product, why do I care who it's coming from? I just want the $20 bill, right? Wrong. Because these industries, they know that the younger that I am, the further away I am from my brain being fully developed, the more likely I am to develop what? Addiction. And again, it has nothing to do with intelligence or personality. You could have the highest IQ out of any 18-year-old in the state of Nebraska. You could be more mature than anyone that you're in school with. You're still years away from your brain being fully developed. So the alcohol, the tobacco, the marijuana industry, do they have access to this information? Yes. They have all the money in the world. They have lots of people that understand how the brain works and how to get people addicted. And so they have some really, really smart ways of influencing people's choices. So again, I know a little, just enough to be dangerous about the gambling industry, the gaming industry. Again, that could be another presentation. But I'm really going to talk about the alcohol, tobacco, and marijuana industry more. We've seen the alcohol industry. It's so widespread and inundated in our society that a lot of times we don't even really point fingers at them because we think as long as you're not drinking and driving, it's fine. Which is a great driving choice, right? If I don't drink and drive, I'm not going to get into a car accident. But is that going to prevent me from developing liver disease or developing an addiction to alcohol? Definitely not. We know tobacco industry, I think we all know they're the bad guys, right? They've gotten in trouble over the years. They've had to cough up a lot of money for the things that they've been doing. So they're kind of an easy target. Then we're going to talk more about the marijuana industry, which is much newer, right? Because marijuana hasn't been legal in states that are legalizing it. It hasn't been legal for very long. And so they are kind of up and coming. And we want to talk a little bit about what's in their playbook. Next slide, please. So when I'm talking about the marijuana industry, I refer to it as Big Tobacco 2.0, okay? Because they have the same playbook that the tobacco industry used to get people hooked on their products and telling them that, it's not addictive and trying to target kids with it, all these things that the tobacco industry did. The marijuana industry is doing the same thing. One of the concerning things about that is how there's no regulation. So regulation is something, especially here in our country, we kind of take that for granted. If I go to the store and I buy some Lucky Charms, am I looking at that thinking, ooh, I really hope it's Lucky Charms. I hope it's not Fruity Pebbles because I'm not in the mood for Fruity Pebbles. No, I'm confident that it is what it says it is. If it's a 16-ounce box, am I trying to shake the different boxes and say, gosh, I hope this one's actually 16 ounces. I don't want to get just 14 ounces. No, because it's something we take for granted. We know that there are procedures put into place, there's laws, and it's really a lot easier for the Lucky Charms makers to just do what they're supposed to do because they know if they don't, it's not going to go very far. So that's what happens with our food. That's what happens with alcohol. Alcohol is also regulated. There's money put into the states and people that regulate it, and it's easy to do. You can measure it. You know how much alcohol is in a beer or in a shot of liquor. All right, with marijuana, because of how it's grown, it's a lot more expensive and a lot more difficult to test and to regulate. So what we've seen happen in states that have legalized is that there aren't a lot of resources available or a lot of people put in charge of going around and making sure that this is what it says it is. It has in it what it says it has in it, and then it doesn't have any of these other things mixed into it that we don't want access to. So in addition to that, we've seen a lot of false claims around it. That kind of goes around the medicinal part of it. We see that when it comes to the claims made around marijuana or using it for medical purposes, it's hard for me to think of any ailment that people haven't said it will help with. Now, I have a slide for this at the very end, and that's why I'm grateful to have someone with my slides, but I knew I was like, I wasn't going to go back and forth. When we're talking about marijuana, there's different components to it. There's actually hundreds of ingredients in it. The ones that we're used to hearing about are probably THC and CBD. So CBD, there is shown to be some medical value there. I can tell it's not as much as what they say it is. It's not going to help with all of those things, but there are some medicinal value to it. All right, there's a THC, which is the stuff that gets people high. And again, what we see happening with the marijuana industry is if I'm trying to get people who are currently using to keep using more, how am I going to do that? What am I going to do to the product? I'm going to make it stronger because that's going to build up my tolerance, right? So that eventually, instead of needing 1/10 of that cookie of a serving size, eventually I'm going to need 1/3 of the cookie. And then eventually I'll eat the whole cookie to get the effects that I want. And I will talk about how the actual effects, instead of it being something like a cure-all for glaucoma, cancer, gosh, I've heard everything around obesity, diabetes, heart disease, anxiety, depression, bipolar disorder, all of these things that people say it's going to help with. But what we actually see, the actual effects, is having a lot of really negative effects on people's mental health. So next slide. When we're talking about the actual the effects that marijuana has, we could talk about people who get relief from their anxiety when they're using marijuana. We could talk about people who have said, I've tried every other thing, but this is the only thing that works for my anxiety. And that happens. What we've seen in studies is that when you put that against a placebo, it doesn't have any better value to it. All right, so for those, just a couple youth in here maybe who aren't familiar with what a placebo is, okay, if I were to give you a pill that had nothing but like sugar in it, and I told you this is going to cure your anxiety, what studies have shown is that a whole lot of people after taking that pill are going to say, you're right, my anxiety is a lot better. All right, so when you measure that placebo against the actual product, we see that the actual product isn't any better. It doesn't perform any better. All right, but we still see an industry setting up shop, literally, all over the place saying that this is going to be helpful. So, we have some of these studies here, and again, to me, this is widespread information because that's my job, right? So I'm always coming across study after study that talks about how much it's hurting people's depression and anxiety. I'm hearing about person after person after person after person after person after person who has lost their teenager or their young adult child to a suicide or to psychosis from using. We don't hear a lot about that in the widespread media, but it's definitely happening. So with these products, when people do use marijuana, what is the risk? For likelihood of addiction, and when we're talking about addiction, we're talking about substance use disorder. So is anyone familiar with those terms? So over the last couple decades, or I guess probably just one decade, we've really switched from talking about addiction and abuse of a substance. Now it's more on a spectrum. So we talk about whether there is a mild, a moderate, or a severe use disorder. Most people who, if you go to 12-step meetings that identify as an alcoholic or an addict, they'll usually meet that severe use disorder criteria. So the likelihood of addiction, we see that 1 in 3 users of marijuana develop some marijuana use disorder, either mild, moderate, or severe, okay? 1 in 6 youth that uses marijuana will develop a severe marijuana use disorder, okay? So that's addiction. 1 in 11 adults, people like over the age of 21 that use, are gonna develop that addiction to it. So overall, between the youth and the adults, it's on average 1 in 9 people that use it will become addicted to it. And the reason that I'm talking so much about addiction is we know that when people become addicted to a substance, a lot of other things in their lives will start to fade, right? Not because I don't care about my faith or my family or my friends or my job. It's not that I don't care about those things. It's that my brain has changed, and that is what I'm most concerned about. So all these other things that are great, I care about them, those are going to have to take a back seat to me getting that substance that I'm addicted to. Next slide. So I've been talking about the marijuana industry. I mentioned states that have legalized, and then we all have probably seen that despite Nebraska has not legalized marijuana, but we still see it, like, everywhere. So we see it in lots of different forms. Next slide, please. And the reason for that is because of this federal bill back in 2018 that got passed for hemp, okay? Hemp is a crop, and it's the same thing as the marijuana plant, but it has 0.3% THC. So that's what the federal government said, is if your plant has 0.3% THC or less, it's considered hemp. Okay, so with that, that means that CBD is also legal and widely available. With that, we've seen a lot of shops came out and started selling CBD like crazy. Now, I have some bad news for people who feel like this is something that's a plant, and if it's natural, if it comes from the ground, then that must be good and harmless, right? You could talk about poison ivy or the tobacco plant. Obviously, I'm not going to want to smoke poison ivy. But just because it's natural, doesn't mean it's safe. But even the CBD, the stuff that we're seeing sold in shops, it's not the CBD that comes from the marijuana plant. It's a synthetic. It's man-made, okay? Delta 8 is also synthetic. It's man-made. Again, this was a loophole, even though I've been told recently that our federal legislators don't like it to be called a loophole because I think it makes them feel like, oh, shoot, we missed something. It was this loophole in the 2018 Farm Bill where they said, ooh, didn't think about that. We ruled over, the 0.3% THC, but that's for the Delta 9 THC. All these other things, these other derivatives, the Delta 8, Delta 10, Delta 0, THCA, all those other things, because they didn't address them in the bill, all of those things have become perfectly legal to sell. And so we see that on signs. You'll see it advertised as federally legal cannabis. And in case anyone didn't know, cannabis, marijuana, I use those interchangeably. They're the same thing. Cannabis has been used, I think, to sound a little bit more sophisticated, but it's the same thing. So when we're talking about the Delta 8 products, we're seeing products that create the same euphoria, the same type of high that Delta 9 THC will cause. So there isn't too much of a difference in what the effects are. In other words, we still see people will recommend that, oh, hey, Sadie, if you've been feeling depressed lately, I know what your pick-me-up needs to be, try CBD. We still hear people talk about using it that way. But again, do we have the studies that show that it's helpful or that it's better than a placebo? No. In fact, we have studies that show that it's not. We also have studies showing that it's actually detrimental to depression, anxiety, bipolar disorder, all of those things. All right, next slide. So when we're talking about these products, keep in mind that as the industry is making them stronger and stronger, Just so that we have a frame of reference, the weed that your grandparents were smoking, or that some of you, not you maybe, but people around you were using back in the 60s, okay, that had about 1 to 2% THC. And THC, again, is that stuff that gets people high. So back then, the 1 to 2%, that was enough to get people high. But through that system of hydroponics, they've made the plant stronger and stronger. So back like when I was in high school, it had probably about 7 or 8% THC. Today, it's going to have, in places like Nebraska, where we don't have a big industry here, probably about 15% THC. But when it gets into the commercialized states, the flower itself, the plant, can have 25 or 30%. And that is not counting the wax, the shatter, the stuff that people put into gummy bears and brownies. Those kinds of products have up to 99% THC. So, like I said, one of the things that I come across with my job is story after story of people who have lost their life to suicide after using a brownie or eating a cookie that had the THC in it, and having psychosis. So my friend Laura, her son Johnny, he was, I want to say 22, and he had become addicted to marijuana. He kind of started to come around to that and realizing, yeah, this was really, really bad for me. I thought that it was helping my mental health issues. Turns out it's really been making it worse. You were right. So he quit for a couple of weeks. Unfortunately, he still developed psychosis from it, and he died by suicide. There's also people, I can tell you story after story about people who have taken marijuana and then within a couple of hours have done some very violent things to other people or to themselves. So I won't go into too many of those stories. You can kind of take my word for it. I gave one example about Laura's son, but really sad and pretty scary things that have happened. And again, I think when I talk about these stories to a lot of people, they're still picturing the stuff that was around back in the 1960s or 70s. So when I'm telling them about someone having marijuana-induced psychosis, they're looking at me and thinking, whew, reefer madness. The reality is that that probably wouldn't have happened back in the 60s and 70s. If it did, it was probably very rare. Today, it's a very common occurrence. So we see that with the Delta 8 THC, the stuff that's being sold and becoming widely available, again, it's really concerning for people that are experiencing mental health problems to be inundated with this message that we have the solution. It's not therapy, it's not antidepressants, it's not something from big pharma, it's something that's natural, that comes out of the ground in this plant that people have been using for thousands of years. Okay, that's the message that a lot of people are being sold on. Next slide, please. So again, we see the problem with that is that there aren't any studies to actually back that up. But again, a lot of people who are desperate, if they're hurting, they want something that's going to make them feel better. They're not going to go home and get on the Journal of the American Medical Association and double check to look at what the products they're using are actually going to do to them. Instead, they're looking at the advertisement and saying, this is going to help my depression or my anxiety. The reality, like I said earlier, just as it does with alcohol, we see that it's actually going to be more likely that it's causing those problems and making them worse. That's very common when we hear people talk about, like, it helps with my anxiety. Well, like, what makes you say that? Well, I stop using and I get really anxious. And then when I smoke again, I feel better. So again, that's kind of this vicious cycle that can happen with the use. That's also known as cannabis withdrawal syndrome. So the products itself, it's not something that, again, has been regulated and tested and made sure that there's no contaminants in it. Okay, there's, in the state of California, there was 1 month they looked and they found 93% of the marijuana that was being sold not on the black market, right, but in the shops, in the legal market. 93% of them tested positive for enough pesticides that could potentially kill someone. So again, very, very unregulated. The health effects of some of these impurities, the long-term effects, I should say, are largely unknown. So what's going to happen to people who have been using this day after day or week after week? Only time will tell, unfortunately. Next slide. So this is the slide I should have had earlier, talking about what THC and CBD are. We know that the CBD could have some medical value, but again, is that what people are getting at the pot shop or the gas station? Most likely not. We see that the Delta 8, again, lots of promises out there, but in reality, it's more likely, instead of helping depression or anxiety, it's more likely to cause depression or anxiety. It's also a lot more likely to cause addiction. Next slide. So when we see this industry, because again, they're not selling the Delta 9 here in Nebraska, they're selling the Delta 8 products. And so it's a free-for-all, right? My favorite radio station, when it gets to commercials, it talks about, sponsored by the cannabis factory. So a lot of these dispensaries are sending out ads to people at their home. And the ads are trying to play on the idea that this is going to get you high. They also will like to say that it's completely natural, federally legal. Next slide. These are actual, this isn't something that I got off the internet. This is an actual ad that my supervisor got sent to her house. And her 16-year-old, well, no, at the time, I think she was 11. She went and got it in the mail, saw it, and for her, she looked at that and said, "Mom, why would they send this to you? Do they not know what you do for a living?" And she was like, "No, nor do they care." And again, we see the stuff that they're saying about it, all the different products. Again, this is being presented as a big solution to people's problems. And the health benefits of the CBD, are you getting CBD when you're using these products? Maybe, maybe not. But again, it's supposed to be helping with all of these ailments. Next slide. Yeah, kind of the same thing. We just see similar to the vaping industry, nicotine, tobacco. We see again the flavors, who they're trying to target. Again, a lot of us know that when something is coming in Fruity Pebbles or strawberry shortcake flavored, they're not trying to target someone my age, right? If they were trying to target adults, it would be like sirloin or Starbucks flavored. I don't know. But we see them. Are they showing pictures of children using this? No. Because that's too obvious. They've gotten very smart, very wise about what they can do to target teens. So that's where the flavors come in. Next slide. One of these, let's see if I can find it. The 30 ounces of Delta 8 flour. In general, the flour, again, that's something that they offer, but most of the products they're selling are in the forms of candy and baked goods, or there's something that people are vaping. So again, you see this picture of a plant, and that's what people's minds go to, is thinking, I'm using this product that's super natural, super natural and helpful, and it's just gonna help me in ways that humans have been using it for centuries. And again, that's not the product that they're selling. That's just the gimmick. That's the idea that they're trying to present. Next slide. So, Laurel, my supervisor, I guess she just did a very thorough job of making sure we could see all of the ads that she's gotten. But again, we see the vapes and the candy. Okay, that's not for vaping nicotine. If you have a vape cartridge, most of those vape cartridges can also have Delta 8 THC put into it and be used. And instead of it having an aroma, like you do if you smell that skunk from people smoking marijuana, this is going to be odorless. So that's another concern. Next slide. So wrapping up here, I'll do my little demonstration, but I do just want to share that Heartland Family Service, we have a lot of different services. We have over 50 different programs. Obviously, I work in substance use prevention. With all the other programs that we offer, I know enough to be dangerous, but my expertise is around substance use. And the reason I'm very passionate about it, and I don't share this like when I go into schools or when I give other presentations, but I thought it was worth sharing with you as an audience because being here as a pastor's kid, and at one point my dad, he was a Methodist pastor, but at one point in life he did serve a Presbyterian church. And so I've just been really excited to be asked to speak here tonight. And so it's very personal to me. And it's also personal when we're talking about addiction always, because even though I don't get my science and my research from my personal experience, that is where I get my passion because I myself am a recovering alcoholic. And I get to call myself that because I'm talking about myself. If you're talking about me, you can refer to me as someone with a severe alcohol use disorder because that's the right terminology. And if you want additional information, I have a few cards, but that preventionmeansprogress.org is a good resource. That's our coalition's, our website. But before we go to Q&A, again, I wanted to give everyone this little tool in their toolbox of understanding what anyone can do to really reduce the odds of developing addiction. All right, so let's say this is my cell phone. What do all of us want to make sure we have on our cell phones to keep it protected? I'm not talking about like spyware or whatever. No, like the device itself. A case and a screen protector, right? So let's say this isn't carpeted. Let's say this is a hard floor and I drop my cell phone, which I've done this in demonstrations in schools and kids who are like not paying attention to a word I've said. When a cell phone drops on the floor, they're like, oh, so they take that very seriously. Am I gonna be comfortable doing that if I don't have a screen protector on my phone? No, probably not. So if I am putting a screen protector on my phone, that's the equivalent of me waiting until I'm 21 to use any substances, right? Just by waiting to be 21, the chances of me developing an addiction will go down 90%. All right, that's the equivalent of having that screen protector on our cell phone. Now, let's say I get the screen protector. Let's say I've turned 21. I do decide to start using. Am I going to want to go around dropping my cell phone a few times a day, even though I have the screen protector? No, probably not. Most of us not going to be comfortable with that. So let's say I only do it every so often. When I do, is it going to be better for me to drop it or if I throw it on the ground? Which is going to be better for my phone? To just drop it, right? So again, that quantity and frequency, once I do turn 21, once I do have the screen protector, I'm still going to want to be conscious of the choices. I'm not going to want to do it. I'm not going to want to drop it all the time. I'm not going to want to throw it. I'm going to want to go lightly, right? So those are things that every single person can do to reduce their likelihood of developing addiction. Can it still happen? Absolutely. In the 12-step meetings I go to, here and there, I'll meet someone who didn't start drinking until they were in their 30s or their 50s. So does it happen? Yes. But you're much more likely to come across people who started drinking during their teen years, and that's where the problems develop. And again, same thing happens with marijuana. We've seen that. We see the data behind it. The more messages that we're getting from Delta 8 manufacturers and those shops, the harder it is for people to realize that this is actually something that could create a problem. So I just want to thank everybody for being here tonight and the staff, because by having this event, you are being part of the solution. That's something I'll tell people a lot of times is that you can either be part of the problem or part of the solution. So my hat's off to you for being part of the solution and having this.
Let's thank Maggie one more time. It was wonderful. Thank you very much. So we will take a few minutes here to do some questions and answers. If you have those cards with you, you're welcome to write down a question. We'll take a moment to gather those up. But before we get into question and answer, we have one more person who's going to share just a couple of minutes with us. Kirk McCormick is from the NAMI organization here in Omaha, and he's going to talk for just a couple of minutes about some group opportunities that are here. And so while he's doing that for just a couple of minutes, finish up writing down some questions, we'll gather those up, and then we'll present those for Sadie and Maggie. Here's Kirk.
Actually, I didn't know I was going to do this, but that's no worries at all. So I'm a peer support facilitator for NAMI, as well as Tracy, Margot back there. They're also on the board. And what we do is we have a group every Tuesday night at Christ Community Church from 6:30 to 8, and it's peer-to-peer. So if anyone's having a bad day, anything mental health related, it's just a safe place for people to go, talk to other people that are dealing with the same thing. It truly saves lives, and it helps people stay out of the hospital. It's just a phenomenal group. So I commend anyone here that has a loved one, yourself, please try to get them there. Yeah.
You bet. Thank you, Kirk. Okay, we're going to take a moment, and we'll have some of our folks kind of go around and collect your cards that you have turned, and just go ahead and turn them in, whether you have a question on them or not. Also, make sure you fill out the information on the back, the survey, the feedback form on the back, and just turn those into our folks, and then we'll weed out a few of them, and then we'll pose the hardball questions to our speakers for a few minutes, okay? Thank you.